And so, like Abby's story, a big part of me getting into this field in the first place was that I wanted to help people. And what I came to realize now, many years later, is that I was driven by compassion, and compassion is great. I mean, we want to help people. That's what we want. We see someone in trouble, we see someone doing something that we know is not good for them, and we just feel motivated to help them. And that was my motivation. Today, though, I realized that without wisdom, that compassion can lead you down some very dark roads. Without wisdom, you don't really know how to truly compassionately help that person. So in compassion, it was 1996. I had just graduated from the University of Texas in Austin, and HIV was a big deal. And it still is, by the way, but this was at the very beginning stages of that. And I just felt led to do something about that. And I ended up volunteering for a gay organization in Austin. And they had prevention money from the government to go out into the community and reach out to men who were at high risk of contracting HIV and reach out to women of childbearing age, and predominantly in high-risk neighborhoods. So I was on 7th Street in East Austin, and I was hired on and I was trained on risk reduction education. And this meant that I had to talk to people about sex and how HIV was transmitted and what they could do to protect themselves. Now, because this is a family event, I'll definitely keep it family friendly. So they trained me on how to do that. And then within a few months, they said, Monica, you need to learn how to reach out to teenagers. We want you to go across the street to Planned Parenthood. So I immediately got a meeting with the director of sex education at Planned Parenthood, and she sat me down in the office and gave me a one-on-one training on how to reach out to teenagers. And she told me all these horror stories, and I mean horror stories. Young girls as young as 10 years old coming into the clinic. And I was shocked about what they were facing in that clinic. And the first thing I thought was, and the first thing I said to her was, you've convinced me this is a big problem. Teach me how to teach these girls not to have sex. That was my first response. That was my first thought. She said, no, dear, we're not going to teach them not to have sex. We're just going to teach them how to do it safer. You see, we need to meet them where they're at with compassion and no judgment, and we just teach them how to do it safer. And I argued at first. I said, yeah, but listen, you just told me about this case and this case and bodily injuries, and they're only 10, they're 11, they're 12. I mean, these are really young girls. She said, we're not here to judge them, honey. She said, they made a choice, and we're just going to teach them how to do it safer. At the time, I was young. I didn't have a whole lot of wisdom at the time either. And I thought, well, this is the head of sex education of Planned Parenthood. They get millions of dollars to do what they're doing in the community. They're professionals. They must know what they're talking about. And so I let her teach me, and I started teaching in East Austin in different schools and in different neighborhoods. What I quickly began to find out, though, was that a lot of these teenagers, as I was teaching them prevention, this is what the teenagers started to teach me. And I wasn't a Christian at the time, but I also had not been a sexually active teenager myself. So perhaps maybe that's why I was a little more compassionate with the teens, and I listened to them a lot. And what I heard from teenagers is that they had these questions about prevention, but they also had questions about sexual activity. And they were, in so many words, letting me know how it was harming them, but they weren't using those words. They were just saying, this happens to me, can you teach me how to do that better? This happens to me, can you please teach me how to do that better? In one instance, I told a girl, have you ever considered not doing that thing that you don't seem to like? And all those kids, and it was in an East Austin school, I had boys and girls, they were 13 years old, and they all looked at me when I asked that question, when I said that to them. And the same girl, and I realized that this was something different for them, to be told that maybe you just don't have to do the thing you don't like to do. And at that moment, and I want you to imagine this, I'm talking about HIV prevention, And I know that many of you have heard what comprehensive sex education looks like. And if you want to invite me again, where we are speaking as adults and not having the kids around, I can show you some of the curriculum so that you understand. Some of you have probably already seen it. So imagine what I had written on the board about HIV prevention, how it's transmitted, and the bodily fluids, and the different sexual acts were just written on the board. And they were very comfortable with it, and they were talking about it, and they were asking me how to do it better. So when this little girl asked me something, and I realized she didn't like what she was doing, I said, well, it sounds like you don't like what you're doing. She said, that's right, I don't like what I'm doing, but if you teach me how to do it better, maybe I will. And I said, well, have you ever considered just not doing the thing you don't like? And that's the moment when they all looked at me, and they were innocent, and they were quiet. And I realized something. And I said, guys, and I looked at the board and I said, do you realize you don't have to do any of this? None of it. And you never have to be in contact with any of these bodily fluids. And the same little girl that asked me that question raised her hand again and she said, ma'am, no one's ever told us that. Comprehensive sex education really does groom children for sexual activity at a very young age. And as you see the headlines, they're talking about human rights and sexual rights. When you look at FOSI, which is pushing sex education on young people, they keep emphasizing that this is their right. They have a right to do this. One of the things that Planned Parenthood taught me is that parents are a barrier to service. Why do you think they say that? Because we naturally protect our children, don't we? We have this inherent need. Every parent has this inherent need to protect their children from danger, from things that they know they're not ready for, burdens that they're not meant to carry, things that we know are dangerous for them. And Planned Parenthood knows that. The CDC knows that. But they consider family a barrier to service. And so they'll do anything possible to ensure that, and we're seeing it in legislation today, that they're passing laws and policies to ensure that teenagers can access services without parents knowing about it. And so our children, in some of their most vulnerable positions, not knowing how to navigate or ask questions in healthcare, are being put in this position all by themselves without their parents there to help them. And that is very, very dangerous, obviously. But how does this also begin to change the way children see themselves and to see marriage and to see the sacredness of humanity and that intimacy between one man and one woman? So what ends up happening is that when sex education can create a new attitude towards sexual intimacy that is more about just pleasure, just seeking objectification of the person, making it material, making it almost like it's just a game, it's just a thing, then that's just one step closer to dehumanizing the baby in the womb. If we dehumanize this act, and if we've objectified this act, and if we've taken the sacredness out of this act, then there's nothing sacred about that baby either. And that's how they groom, because that's a whole part of the process. Because the ideology behind comprehensive sex education is that this is just for pleasure. You have the right to have that pleasure. You have the right to avoid the consequences without your parents having to know or bother you with it. And then if you get pregnant, conceive a child, because it's both the man and the woman, or girl and boy, who are now parents, you can get rid of this too, because it's all just material. None of it has value. Now, how did I finally leave? Part of it was those teenagers. Part of it was really realizing and hearing these teenagers telling me that they weren't ready. And as many of you parents here today know, sometimes our teens don't know how to tell us. Sometimes as adults, we don't know that we're going through something, and sometimes it's someone who loves us that says, I can tell you're struggling in this area, and you're like, oh yeah, I guess I am. Well, our teens go through the same thing. Our kids are going through the same thing. They don't always know. And we're the ones that have to interpret that for them. And so what ended up happening is, especially here at Nobody's School in Waco, when I taught there, I started teaching the girls a little bit differently. And one year I was talking to them and asking them about what they wanted in life. What did they want to become? And those little girls, they were only 12 years old, mind you, 12 years old. And they said, one said, I want to be a volleyball player. And another one said, I want to be a nurse. And another one said, I love to dance. I want to be in drill team and I want to dance. I want to be a ballerina and, just pursue dance. That's wonderful. I said, wonderful. These are great goals. I said, now I want you to imagine your best friend or someone in your life, anybody. It could be a family member who you trust. Who's that person that no matter what you do, they're always there for you? They laugh with you. They mourn with you. You just know you can trust this person. You feel so safe with this person. Imagine who that person is, but don't tell me. You can just keep it to yourself. So they imagined it, and they looked really happy. I said, okay, now you're about to, of course, we're at a sex ed conference, so we know we're talking about dating and all of that. So I said, okay, hey, you're about to start junior high. What do you think about boys, and what are your thoughts about dating and things like that? And they started to giggle, and they started to blush. And I said, well, what do you think that boy should be like? What do you imagine the boy that you date to be like? And they didn't have an answer. Maybe he's cute. Maybe he's in sports. Okay. I said, well, how do you think he should treat you? And they kind of shrugged. They weren't sure. I said, do you think he could be a lot like your best friend, the one that you just thought of, the person that makes you safe, the person who encourages you, the person who wants the best for you? Should he be like that? And I'm like, yeah. I said, yeah, he should be that way. It's someone who keeps you safe, someone who's like your best friend. And so that made them happy and they relaxed. I said, okay, now let's talk about your dreams again. Tell me, what are those things, what do you think are some obstacles that would keep you from being a nurse or a teacher or a ballerina? And because of the context of where we were, a sex education conference, and we talked about healthy relationships and unhealthy relationships, and they said, well, maybe dating someone who would hurt us. Like, yeah, that could really be an obstacle. And then finally they said, getting pregnant? I said, well, let's talk about that. And I used open-ended questions with these girls. They're only 12. I said, so tell me, what can you do to overcome that obstacle? And they're like, well, not have sex? I said, well, what do you think about that? And they're like, well, if we don't have sex, then we don't have to worry about diseases, and we don't have to worry about pregnancy, and we don't have to worry about... That's right. I said, yeah, that's right. What do you think about that? Again, I'm just like, what do you think about that? And finally, one little girl, we're sitting crisscross applesauce on the floor. One little girl got up and put her hands on her hips, and she said, wait a minute, do you want us to have sex or not? That told me something. That when you bring kids into a sex education conference, they know that you're there to teach them about sex. They know that the expectation is that now that you've gone into puberty, this is the natural next step. And this one girl, didn't understand why I was then helping them have a conversation and think for themselves about the reasons they should avoid this in the first place. And I leaned in, and because my coworkers were around me, and I leaned in, I said, if it were just up to me, I want you to not have sex right now. I want you to be that nurse, and I want you to be that teacher, and I want you to be that dancer. And as soon as I said that and was encouraging them, those little girls, their shoulders literally relaxed, and they smiled, and they were happy. What I tell parents today is that our children are waiting for us to lead. They're waiting for us to set up that expectation for them, but they need us to have a conversation. Not only do they need us to model that behavior, but they need to hear it from us as well. They're waiting to hear it because they're hearing it everywhere else. The reason I started the organization I have today is because of what Planned Parenthood taught me. As a Title X training manager, as I trained them all over Texas and New Mexico, they kept telling me, parents are a barrier to service. Parents are a barrier to service. Those parents, those religious households, they're the problem. Parents are a barrier. Parents are a barrier. So today I believe in family. I believe that parents are the greatest authority and the sole authority for their children. And we underestimate ourselves on how much influence we have on our children. Data actually shows us that teenagers have said that those who have become sexually active at a young age have actually said that they regret it and wish they had waited. Research shows us that when young people become sexually active, they have a higher incidence for depression and suicidal ideation, which also means that they begin to fail academically as well. Teenagers also said, here's the good news, they said that they felt that parents influenced them more than any workshop, than any media, or than any peer. But they needed parents to actually speak about it. So I created an organization called It Takes a Family, because I know that it takes a family to raise strong children and to have healthy communities and to have a great nation. I know that the missing link for many families is the ability to speak openly with their children, not graphically, but in a way that honors them and that they can honor other people as well. And so It Takes a Family, what I do there is I meet with parents, and I also meet with teenagers at times. But I meet with parents and I educate them and I equip them with all of the information that they need to know. And many times parents need to know a lot of information about what is going on in the community, what is going on in the schools, because you need to be able to have a response to your children about what they're hearing at school or what they're seeing in media, because the messages are loud. When I first started the organization, I asked my son, I said, Ibri, I want to create a curriculum for parents, but I want to know from a teenager what would work best for teens. What would you like to see? And he was 17 at the time. And he said, Mom, please don't create a video. Please don't make a workbook. We do not want to watch a video, and we do not want to work with a workbook. I said, well, how am I going to get the information then? And he said, do what you did for me. And I said, well, what did I do for you? And he said, you spoke to me from your heart. You told me what you wanted for me, what your expectations were of me, what you wanted for my life, the goodness, because kids actually want to know what their parents want from them. We want to have that conversation. And I said, really, well, you roll your eyes a lot. He's like, that's okay. And that's okay. Parents, our kids are going to roll their eyes. They might say that it's awkward. I was talking to some parents in Oklahoma, and many of them were, I asked, what is so difficult about you to talk to your children about sex? And they said, well, it's so graphic. And they started listing all these things about the education. I said, well, who told you to be graphic? Who said you had to be graphic? And the realization is that all of us somehow have fallen for the lie that Planned Parenthood has taught us, which is that we have to be really graphic about this information. And so then I said, why don't we go back to the Bible? Why don't we go back to Genesis? And what did God teach us? How did he say it? How did he say it in Scripture? And it was really simple. Adam knew Eve. And we understand that. God honors marriage. God honors intimacy. And we are to model that at our homes, and we are to model that in our speech to our children. But yes, they are going to have questions about things that they see and hear outside your home. And you need to be prepared to answer those questions without anger and without judgment. And that is going to be very challenging. And that's what It Takes a Family, my organization, does, is I will educate parents about these things. How do I talk if my kids ask me about what is this transgender thing going on? Like, what does this mean? I have a friend that said this. You need to be able to answer those questions for them and bring it back to the Word of God as well. It's very important. So when you think about finances, I'm sure John knows about this, and you're budgeting and you have a car and you need to prepare yourself for that oil change, you need to save money for the oil change. You know that you're going to have to change the tires on your car, so you save money to have new tires on your car one day. It's the same thing. You need to prepare yourself as a parent for those tough questions that they're going to bring. Because if they don't feel that they can ask you, they're going to ask the sex educator at their school, or they're going to search it, or they're going to ask a friend. And you need to be prepared to answer that question yourself in your home the way that you know honors them and honors your family and honors your culture and protects your children. And I know that's a tough thing to say and tough thing to do, but it's how we need to respond. Now, how did I come out of all of this? Part of it was that halfway through my time in comprehensive sex education, I found myself with an unplanned pregnancy myself. And I knew my parents were going to be mad at me. And I knew my family, extended family and such, were going to be very ashamed of me. And I was faced with a decision. And the decision I made was to schedule an abortion appointment. Because that's the world that I lived in. I was a comprehensive sex educator. I did what comprehensive sex education taught me. And the next step after having a pregnancy was to have an abortion. And I ended up calling a friend who had had an abortion. And I talked to her about it. Not really because I wanted her to change my mind, but just because I wanted some sympathy, I think. She started to celebrate the life of my child. And I interrupted her and I said, no. I already have an appointment for abortion. I'm not trying to celebrate this life. I just, wanted to tell you that I'm about to do this. And she said, don't worry about that. She said, oh my gosh, your son is going to be so good looking. It's such a great looking son. Oh, our sons could know each other. They're going to be best friends. What if you have a little girl? If you have a little girl, what if she has your eyes? Oh, she's going to be a little moniquita. Oh my goodness. She just kept imagining my baby. And as she kept talking on the phone and basically celebrating on the phone, I started to think, why am I doing this? Why? And this is the first time I ever thought of my baby as a human. I said to myself, why am I going to kill my own baby? And I realized because of the controversy, because my family was going to be upset, because people were going to be ashamed of me, because being a single mom, it would be shameful that I wasn't married. It would be controversial. It would be hard. And then I thought, well, this isn't the first time my parents are going to be mad at me. And I'm sure they're going to get mad at me again. And shame and controversy, is that really worth the life of my child? So I chose shame and controversy. I said, I can handle that. And so I told my friend, you're right. I'm going to keep my baby. And she said, well, of course you are. Oh my gosh, our kids are going to grow up together. And she just continued to celebrate. So I need to get off the phone so I can cancel this abortion appointment. And so I did. I hung up the phone, I canceled that appointment, and I have a 20-year-old son today. And he is an absolute blessing. He was never the shame of the family. And because of my son, when he turned a year old, God had been working on me all along. And this is something that I mentioned to this group years ago when I first came here. Your prayers are so important because I don't know who prayed for me, but I met many people like you while I was a comprehensive sex educator. And I will admit, I laughed at you. I thought abstinence was laughable because I was lost and I didn't know better. But those people prayed for me, and I'm sure a lot of my other coworkers. And when my son turned a year old, that first year of having him, God was working in me, and I felt called to go to a church, and I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior, and nothing has been the same ever since. When I came home that day, I didn't really know the Christian terminology for anything. And I remember coming home and I was living with my boyfriend at the time, which I did not teach my son to do, of course. But I came home, I said, I think I got saved. I think that's what I just did. And so I never stopped going to church. I kept going to church every Sunday, and quietly in my seat, I would recite the prayer over and over again in my head because I was so afraid it didn't stick. But it stuck. I'm definitely saved. But so once that happened, though, I started to see the world very differently. So the compassion I had for that same population of people, the men living in a homosexual lifestyle, the women who were prostitutes in government housing, the teenagers, I saw them completely different. And all of a sudden, this evidence-based intervention that the CDC had trained me to implement into the community was severely lacking. Severely lacking. These evidence-based interventions, nice and fancy word, are not effective. They are killing communities of people all over our country. As a matter of fact, the Health and Human Services admitted several years ago that their teen pregnancy prevention program, which is risk reduction and evidence-based, that it had no effect or made things worse, and they scrapped that program in the state of Texas. Definitely clapped. But you know the sad thing? They still haven't given up on risk reduction education. They have that proof. If you can actually read this report, you can go to my website on monicacline.com. I have the report on my website. It actually shows that some of the programs, the teenagers reported that they started having more sex than even before the program. It did not ever show that they increased the use of condoms. It actually increased the rates of STDs in the population of kids who are part of these programs. It's not working. And the government knows it, but yet they keep pushing it and they keep pushing it. And you know what's making the difference today? You are. The voice of parents getting involved and talking to their school districts, talking to their school boards, talking to their state legislators, and changing bills and changing laws to ensure that parents continue to be the sole authority over their children and that their values are being reflected in the laws, but the only way that's going to happen is if you vote your biblical values. And if you do not vote your biblical values, then you're voting for someone else. Someone else's values are going to be in there. And they are aggressive and they are relentless. And we can't give up. We can't give up in our home and we can't give up in our community, and we have to be involved in our government. Because slowly, little by little, even the Texas Homeschool Coalition is working so hard to ensure that parental rights are not being infringed upon. Because our communities and our governments are starting to see that homeschooling is deterring and taking away from their agenda. And so we need to make sure that parents have a solid foundation and a solid front with one another. Very important. Today, a lot of what we're doing in the Austin area, and I don't know what you're doing here in Waco, and I don't know how many of your children are actually in public school, but this is for our whole community though. Meaning, even if you homeschool your children, know that there are many children in the school system who are being exposed to this information, and they're part of your community. And there's a little term that we use in my line of work, and it's called advantage discrimination. And what that is that we say, this realization, like for example with me, when I began to realize that this education was severely lacking and hurting children, I taught my son differently. But then how could I still be working at an organization where I was teaching other parents or other people's children something completely different? Something that wasn't healthy for their kids, which is part of the reason why I left. And so what we need to do is that even if you are homeschooling, know that you're still part of a larger community and that every child deserves the same advantage. And we can do that together We can vote to ensure that this kind of education is not coming into our schools. Know that in Texas, sex education is actually optional. We don't have to have it in our schools at all. But if we are to have it, Texas says it should be abstinence-based. And there are some amazing programs out there that are evidence-based that can be implemented in each of our schools if the school so chooses. And the way that you can do that is to become a committee member of your local SHAC. Have any of y'all heard of a SHAC before? A SHAC is a school health advisory committee. And every district has a SHAC, and it is made up of some staff members of the school, leaders in the community, parents, public health people as well. And you have a right to apply to be a member of that SHAC to help make determinations on health care and health studies in the school. And what we found in Austin is that the majority of the SHACs were overrun by Planned Parenthood and by people who supported Planned Parenthood. And so they were determining what the health education was like in every school. And so now we're playing catch up. And we're getting parents on the SHACs. And even if they're not members of the SHACs, we still go there and we still, put in our 2 cents and we fight and we do what we need to do to protect children. And so my call for you today is there's 2 things. 1, become an informed parent. It's not good for you to be behind. I know, Paul in the Bible, he made sure he didn't worship the culture, but he knew the culture. He knew what people were reading. He knew what the culture was believing. And he could speak directly to what the culture was worshiping. And then he shared what he knew was right. And that's what we need to be doing. We need to be educated about what the culture is doing. What is their messaging? How are they getting that message out? What is it that they believe? And then we need to teach not only ourselves, but at times when necessary, our own children when they come and ask us questions. And I can help you do that. And I would love to help you do that. Because this is not just about sex education, it's also leading into the abortion. And in all honesty, another reason I left is because Planned Parenthood admitted to me that they do not see our young children as victims of human trafficking. They see our children as willing participants.
Wow.
And that was in Corpus Christi. And when I came back to Austin and I told my Title X supervisor that Planned Parenthood had just admitted to me that they refused to report victims of human trafficking or statutory rape and consider these girls as willing participants, she became angry with me and said that my job was just to educate them and it was not to hold them accountable and that I needed to mind my own business. Within weeks, she also told me that if I was not pro-abortion, I did not belong there. And that was in 2009, and I did leave. That is when I quit, and when I started to speak out against comprehensive sex education and how it is grooming our children and grooming our communities towards abortion. But I want to leave you with a message of hope. And that hope is that there's people like myself, people like Abby Johnson, there's people like you who know the wisdom and know how to raise your children in a certain way. Our kids are waiting for us to lead. And I know that at Pro-Life Waco, you all have been leading. You've been leading here for years, and I know you're leading in your families, but there are some parents and some people who are not leading, and they need you to come and help them do that. And it's happening even in your own church. It is such a difficult subject to talk about. It's shocking. It's difficult. But if we don't have this conversation, we become silent and we become passive and we allow it to continue. I don't always enjoy coming up here and telling you this bad news. It is difficult for me. It would be really nice if I could focus on, something that seemed a lot happier. But this is important for our children, and it's important for our future generations. It's important for the future of marriage and family, and for our future leaders. But I want to encourage you that our kids, no matter what you see on a daily basis, They really want to see their parents lead in their homes. They will be greatly influenced by your decisions and by your hopes and expectations for them. They're just waiting for you to lead. They're waiting for you to listen, and they're waiting for you to speak. And they're just waiting with open arms and open ears. And even if they roll their eyes, believe me, they're listening. They're definitely listening, and they're moving forward. So my own son's friends have just commented to me as well as we were, my son would apologize for me. He'd say, I'm sorry, I know my mom is strict, or I know my mom is, is so involved. And so many of his guy friends said, one young man, he didn't have his mother in his life anymore because she had suffered from schizophrenia. He said, I wish I had a mom that cared for me that much. I wish I had someone who was there for me. I had his friends coming to me, asking me questions about drugs and all kinds of things because they knew that I would care for them. They knew I would help them with their parents. They knew that they could get help. And that's what we need to be able to do, is offer that help. Now, I do have 5-10 minutes for questions, and I'm sure you're curious. Go for it.
You said that you could speak on how the schools are getting around the law that forbids Planned Parenthood in the schools.
So we passed a bill called SB 22.
Repeat the question.
She's asking about how schools are getting around Planned Parenthood. For example, in the past, when I was asked to go into schools, it's basically the school didn't know I was going in. A teacher just invited me. I showed up as a speaker for the class, and I just did it. So sometimes it's as easy as that. Today, they can officially get Planned Parenthood. Well, today in Texas, because of SB 22, they cannot have Planned Parenthood curriculums coming into the school because it keeps all abortion providers from being able to work in a government facility. Yeah, that's amazing. That's a very good bill. And myself and several other parents testified in support of that bill. And so again, these were parents that made this bill happen. It wasn't just a random state legislator. It was us working with state legislators to make this happen. So get involved for sure. So now Planned Parenthood can't come in, but how are they still doing it? Well, in Austin ISD, the shack, which is overrun by the other side, has now adopted some parts of a curriculum from Canada and a little bit from Big Decisions, and they've kind of put it together. And that's what they're trying to pass. So it's still the same kind of information. It may not be from Planned Parenthood, but they're still gonna try to get that information in there. So how do you overcome that? Join your shack. Consistently go to the shack meetings. Listen. One of the other things that we're working on is transparency and making sure that shack meetings are part of public record, which they're currently not. So that's why it's really important that you go into your shacks. You can find out about your local shack on your ISD website. It's called School Health Advisory Committee. And it should have the contact name, email, and phone number of whoever's leading that shack. And you are allowed to go to those meetings.
So what's that called in the ISD?
Yeah, your Waco ISD, if that's what it's called. So just go to their website and find the shack. And if you can't find it, then go to your school and tell them that you want to be connected with the shack.
So the shacks are district-wide, they're not school located?
They are district-wide, so they're going to be making decisions for elementary, middle, and high school.
One other question. Did the birth of your son help lead you to faith in Christ?
Yes, and I think, honestly, I think that because of many people's prayers, and once I had my son, I have to also say that the way I was raised by my parents is not how I ended up, working in that environment. But my parents had very deep family values. My parents are the kind of parents that there were no babysitters. In other words, we did everything as a family, always. We went to a movie together, we ate breakfast together, we had dinner together, we fed our farm animals together, we did everything together. My mom and dad, they were each other's best friends. And so that was modeled to me. So when I had my own son, that's what I did. Even if I didn't have faith in God, I knew that I was gonna fight tooth and nail for my son and that I was gonna give him the best. And part of that was, going through some postpartum depression, some difficulties. And honestly, it was just God calling me. I saw a bumper sticker to a church. That is literally how I went to church. I saw a bumper sticker, and I saw it so many times that was the only church I knew of. And I went to that church and I got saved that first day.
Did you eventually marry your son's father?
I did not. So the closer I became to Christ, the further he became from both of us. And so that was very difficult. I was a single mother for 9 years. And but I tell you what, I was a Christian for a full year before he left the family. And I was in scripture all the time. And so when he left, even though I mourned that break, I also realized it's always just been my son, God, and I. Nothing really changed. So I clung on to God, and I clung on to Isaiah 54, where he told me that my God is also my husband, and I depended on him 100%. And that's what helped me get through it. Any other questions? That's right. I'm glad you asked. So that was the perfect opening. Yeah, you paid her? Yeah, Jeff paid her to say that. That's wonderful. So 9 years later, I was very much involved in church. I loved to lead in church. I was actually leading a singles ministry for single parents. And that's actually how Jeff and I met. And of course, I was leading it. So when I saw him walk in, I immediately thought, oh, I can't be looking at anybody. I'm leading a ministry. But we would all go out to lunches together. And I really love singles ministries for older adults because many of them do have children. And we found a lot of friendship in being able to have lunch together and have our kids, and everyone understood what it was like to have children and to be single. And that helped me so much. And of course, my church had a lot of wonderful married couples that I was able to glean from as well. And Jeff, when we were dating, I was actually still working as a Title X training manager. And he was actually the one that when I was in Corpus Christi about to train Planned Parenthood, he called me the night before and he said, this is not honoring God, what you're doing. It was a nice, he was so loving and so merciful, and I was argued with him because it was so hard for me to understand and to let go that I wasn't really helping people. And do you know that the next day was the day that Planned Parenthood laughed at me and said, these girls, they want to do this. They're not victims of human trafficking. And that was the last straw, and that's when I finally quit. So God was definitely using Jeff, many people in my life to help me see what was really happening. Any other questions? Yes.
I heard you at the women's conference, you said something about having a website that you were going to have a curriculum for the parents. Is that coming out?
Yes, so I currently have Monica Cline. She's asking about the curriculum that I'm creating. So I currently have, and good, I'm glad you saw me at the Pro-Life Women's Conference. Yeah, this last one in Louisiana. Okay, yeah, if you haven't been, you definitely need to go. It is transformative, and it's just amazing how strong women become coming out of that. So I am working on a book, because obviously there's so many more parents that need to know the truth behind comprehensive sex education. And I'm also working very closely, prayerfully, and in scripture to write a curriculum that honors God, honors family, and honors our children. So that is in the works. I'm also currently, in the meantime, as that is being developed, will be a trained Heritage Keepers teacher. And Heritage Keepers is the only sexual risk avoidance, which is abstinence. It is the only one that currently has approval from the federal government to be an evidence-based intervention, and it is a phenomenal curriculum. It was created by people of faith, but it is secular in the sense that you can